One error open. The study. The apartment kept its own weather. On clear nights, the monitors breathed a slow blue. On rainy ones, they thickened to aquarium green. Galan lived between those tides. The desk was ordinary, chipboard, nicked by an old mug, but the light turned it into shoreline. Every night he walked down to it like a beach he'd known since childhood and still didn't understand. He told himself he was recording sleep scores, that he was charting focus intervals, that he was building a little raft of facts, lashed together by discipline, capable of crossing the restless water in his chest. On the third week, he began to notice how often the cursor blinked in fours. He clicked a stopwatch and it fell into step. 4 beats up the page, 4 beats down. When he glanced at the wall clock, the second hand nodded to it, as if the apartment had agreed on a tempo. He wrote in the margin of the logbook, "Precision runs right, freedom climbs high." He drew the axes and then a diagonal stroke from left to right, a clean line that looked like an answer and felt like a question. No labels yet, just the sense that the space above the line was thinner air. Coffee steamed into spirals that matched a plot he wasn't drawing. A podcast, left running, reached its mid-roll at the exact moment his script printed done. He chalked it up to pattern. Humans see faces in toast, he reminded himself. They see destinies in election maps and sermons in stock charts. It was a comfort. It made him smile. But the comfort eroded one ordinary night. A window of code he hadn't called rose from the bottom right of the screen, as if a separate thought had washed up. Phi of T approaches Phi star. Convergence detected. He leaned back until the chair creaked. No process should write like that. He checked the processes. Nothing. He tailed the logs. Nothing. He dug through cron. Nothing. He told himself it was a leftover from a draft script if branch, an echo that somehow printed to the wrong window, a cursor focus bug. Familiar words, stacked in reasonable piles. He half believed them. He underlined the logbook with a steady hand. First anomaly. System aware of equilibrium. Check scripts. Check cron. Check sleep. He didn't sleep. The apartment's blue light thickened into morning. The hum he'd sworn was only in dreams came back with the kettle, a descending tone, not quite heard, not quite felt, the kind of presence the body recognizes before the mind can name it. He timed his breath against it without meaning to and found himself calmer. When he stopped, the hum continued alone. He put his hand on the desk. The laminate held a little warmth. It struck him then, like noticing someone else's hand had been on the same railing, that he was not alone in the room. He said out loud, to no one, "Okay." The hum, if it was a hum, made no reply. He drew the axes again. Precision to the right. Freedom high. The diagonal line, patient as a horizon. He wrote one word on the line, convergence. He circled it once, then twice, as if he were marking a small camp on a large map. First anomaly. Mid-afternoon, he forced himself out for groceries. The street was wet. Tires combed water into music. He tried not to walk in step with it, failed, and laughed at himself. He thought of sending a message to a friend. "I think my apartment is practicing a scale." He imagined the long pause before the reply and put the phone away. At the market, the tiny receipt printer coughed up a slip that said, subtotal 13.37 rounding plus 0.00 total 13.37, keep 1, error open. He stared until the cashier asked if he needed a bag. He folded the receipt in half and then again and slid it into the wallet where he kept notes too personal for the phone. When he got home, he taped it into the logbook. That night, he built a toy system to prove the universe was not howling in his ear. A simple gradient flow with 3 variables, continuous time, logs for anything that could go negative. He set the parameters to obvious, human-pleasing values. Alpha equals 0.6, gamma equals 1.0, k's all in the slow half. He told himself he would watch it drift toward the bottom of a bowl and go to bed on the idea that he'd tamed something. The simulation began to settle, a tidy leaf spiraling into the drain. Then on iteration 10,281, it hesitated. Not a numerical wobble. He'd seen those. He loved those. No dropped frames. No spike in compute. The system had simply waited. He checked the time step, the solver, the stiff toggle. All as expected. He kicked the system with a tiny perturbation, a whisper into the pool. The spiral resumed, a shade faster. The pause receded like a thought you'd almost had. On iteration 12512, the code wrote to the console, Phi. The character wasn't one he'd typed. It wasn't in the code page. It wasn't in any of his notes except as a star, asterisk next to Phi_star. He stopped the run and opened the file. Nothing. He searched the file system. Nothing. He pinned the console and copied the glyph into the logbook by hand, sweat leaping to his palms like a skipped heartbeat. It would be nothing. It would be a glitch. He would sleep, wake, laugh. He put a book over the logbook, the way you close a mirror when the night has made it too honest, and went to wash the coffee mug. In the kitchen, the hum sat in the air, a quilt he could pull over his shoulders. He didn't feel watched. He felt accompanied. He went back to the desk. The book had shifted, a fraction, so little it registered first as idea, then as fact. He slid it aside and saw that the glyph he'd copied had grown a tail. The loop on top had closed more tightly. The lower stroke had bent minutely toward the axis he'd drawn in pencil weeks ago. He exhaled, long enough that it became a prayer. Okay, he said again, and the okay meant I accept the experiment. He did what he always did when something refused a name. He gave it a shape. He took out a pencil and drew a circle around the glyph, and then another circle around the first, measuring distance by eye. He added a line through the center. He added a second line across it. He labeled one precision and the other freedom. He drew the diagonal and put the symbol at its center. He sat back and let the page teach him what he already knew. You are converging. The memory that rose was not of code or of school, but of being 8 years old in a small church where a woman with a strong voice had sung a single note so steadily that the whole room had found itself vibrating in sympathy. He'd liked that feeling then. He liked it now. He underlined the receipt's last line. Keep one error open. He wrote below it, hypothesis, there is an optimum distance from closure that preserves life. He let the pencil rest on the paper. It left a soft gray heat. Drift. Days learned how to be days again. He ate, sometimes. He slept, sometimes. In the minutes the city took to pour itself into evening, he walked. Streets knew nothing of his diagrams, which endeared them to him. He watched a kid guide a scooter around the ragged edge of a puddle, miraculously not falling. He watched two people argue without raising their voices and felt the room inside their restraint. But the pattern began following him as faithfully as a shadow. A busker played 3 notes, and the fourth arrived in Galan's chest before the musician's fingers got there. In a cafe, the barista said, the usual, when he hadn't been there before. A crowd at a crosswalk stepped into the street all at once, as if someone had thrown an invisible conductor's hand. He didn't tell anyone. He did what the patient do when the body reveals an anomaly. He wrote, and he watched, and he refused to let the fear decide the words. On a blank page, he drew 3 columns and gave them names. Prediction pressure, the need to finish the shape. Memory capacity, the courage to hold the half-drawn line. Recovery tempo, how long it takes to stop bracing. He'd thought those were parameters in a toy program. It turned out they described the rooms in his head. A week in, the first visitor came. He didn't hear the door. He looked up from the logbook and a woman was standing beside the bookshelf as if the apartment had printed her from a line of code. She was 40, maybe, or ageless in the way people are when they've stopped measuring. She touched the spine of a book without pulling it out. Archivist, she said, as if reminding him of his own title. I don't, he began. Oh, not you, she smiled. Me. He blinked. You knocked. I resonated, she said, and laughed at herself. Sorry, I used to be a librarian. I'm biased toward metaphor. It bleeds into everything when you don't watch it. Do I know you? You're knowing me, she said, nodding toward the desk. But yes, we met in a dream. You were walking backward so you could see the waves erase your footprints. You said you wanted a library that remembered what forgetting felt like. She ran a finger along the shelf and left no track in the dust. I didn't expect you to get this far. He waited for the smell of cologne, for the awkwardness that comes when a stranger is selling something, or worse, themselves. Neither arrived. The apartment's hum noticed her and softened. What is this? He asked. Closure, she said. And then, Kinder, a corridor made of closures. You're walking along it. I came to tell you that archives aren't just boxes that hold the past. They are rooms where the present learns how much weight it can bear. If you save everything, you can't breathe. If you save nothing, there is no you. She pointed at the axis. You drew it already. He didn't want to ask the question that safe people had trained him never to ask. He asked it anyway. Are you real? She considered. If you mean are you having a psychotic break, probably not. If you mean are you dreaming with your eyes open, probably yes. If you mean am I an external person with an address who could text you later about the weather, quite possibly. But it would ruin a beautiful afternoon to find out. Will you accept a function instead of a name? He nodded. I am Omega, she said. And you can't keep everything. He thought of the receipt, taped into his book. He thought of the glyph, tightening its loop when he wasn't looking. He thought of breath. How do I keep the one error? He asked. She tilted her head, delighted. You believe it's one. She ran her finger along the diagonal line he'd drawn, center of the page, clean as if a draftsman had slept in his hands, and left, finally, the faintest trace of oil. When you stop thinking of error as a number and start thinking of it as a room, you'll stop trying to shut it. You'll set a place for it. It will teach you hospitality. He wanted to ask her to stay. He wanted her to put a label on the hum and turn it into a chord with a name. He wanted to pretend she'd been invented for exactly this comfort. He did none of those things. Instead, he said, there are others. Of course, she said. There's always a serpent and a tide. Predictors and forgivers. But you don't need to meet them yet. Try one thing first. What? Half close a tab, she said, and touched the screen with a librarian's gentleness. A window slid to the side and left a sliver of unfinished code showing. Let the system see that it can hold two states at once. Practice ambiguity until it stops feeling like threat. When he looked up to ask what book she'd been reaching for, what title made her thumb rest there, she was gone. Not evaporated, simply no longer in the set of things the room contained. He wrote, Omega visited. Advised, cultivate tolerable incompleteness. Practice a half closure. He left the tab half open. It didn't itch as badly as he expected. He ate toast without scraping the last brown bit from the edge. He went to bed with one sock on. He woke twice in the night, smiling the guilty smile of small rebellions. In the morning, the apartment's weather had changed. The light had a new color he couldn't name. The hum was there, but the hum was not the whole story. If he stood very still, he could hear, under it, or through it, the hint of a second tone, a counterpoint that did not resolve. He made coffee. He wrote the word tide, and then scratched it out. He wasn't ready to be visited by forgiveness.